Hello, hope you're having a good day. My name is Emmanuel and today we're going to be learning about networking. Right? And in our last video we did sort of like an introductory video teaching the concept, and today we're going to actually write code and send a request to the server and get a response. Right? Exciting, right? It's cool. So before we get to it, I'd like to give a shout out to Malik, who won our coupon last week, and he picked a very beautiful product actually, and today we're going to have another giveaway, so hopefully you win it. Good luck to you, man. So let's get to today's video, guys. Now first things first, go ahead and create a new project. I have mine open. It's a blank project. And then next question is, how do we make a request? Very simple. We're going to be using something called URL Sessions, okay? And URL Session gives us an API that allows us to be able to upload data and download data from the server, okay? And this class actually gives us different tasks. So we have the data task, the download task, upload task, and the stream or WebSocket. And in this video, we're actually going to be focused on the data task. In other videos, we're going to break down the other tasks, but for now, we're going to work on the data task. So what exactly is a data task? The data task allows us to be able to send and receive data as a data object, and it is stored in memory, okay? So we want to use the data task whenever we're making like quick requests, something that's not going to be heavy or large, all right? So a typical example is when we want to probably do like a login or registration, or want to fetch a list of users or books, or want to delete an article or something, okay? So these are tasks that are not exactly heavy. So we want to just use a data task and send receive. It's going to be stored in memory. Now, how do we do that? Let's actually go into code, all right? I've been waiting for this time. So whenever you want to start making a request, the first thing we know we need to use is the URL sessions. So now we know we need the URL session. Let's go ahead and create an instance of the URL session, okay? Now, we actually have a singleton called shared. And you can see that this returns a URL session. Now this shared object, or this shared instance, actually has a configuration. So if we go ahead and do this, we can see .datatask that we can use to make our request. Now let's just hold off for a little bit. Let me explain some other things. Now, a URL session has configurations. Now these configurations actually tell the networking layer what rules should be applied. So for example, we can configure this session to only allow mobile or cellular communication or Wi-Fi. Do you understand? We can actually set limits, and let me even give an example. So let's say we want to create a configuration. I'm going to call this config, and this is going to be of type URL session configuration, like that. And you can see if I put in dots, we have three different types. We have the default, we have the ephemeral, and we have the background. So for the default, you can see over here it says a default session configuration object, and this is actually very similar to the shared object, but the difference now is that for the default we can actually change the configuration. So I can say config.allows cellular access and say this should be equal to false or equal to true, right? So this allows us to be able to configure our session more. I hope that makes sense. So we also have this one, ephemeral, right? And you can see here it says a session configuration that uses no persistent storage for caches, cookies, or credentials. So it tells us here that these caches, cookies, none of them are going to be stored on your disk, okay? So we also have the background, which says that it creates a session and yada yada yada, downloads to be performed in background. So this allows you to be able to actually make requests, upload and download data while your app is in background. Pretty cool, right? So let's actually see how to make the request. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the shared instance, the singleton. So I'm going to say let session be equal to, and I'm going to say URL session dot shared, like that. Now in this video we're learning about data task and I'm just going to write data task, but you can see over here that we also have upload task, we have download task, we have stream task, okay? And in other videos we're going to cover these, but for now we're going to say data task. Now you can see that we have different options. For now, we want to make a simple GET request. So if you remember from our last video, we spoke about the different methods: HTTP verbs, GET, POST, delete, create, right? So well, what did I even say? I said create. So POST, GET, delete, put. Okay, so we're going to be making a GET request, and by default this request is going to be a GET. So you're not going to see us using anything like GET. So we're going to use a data task with URL like this. So now we know that we need to pass in a URL. So let's create a URL. So here I'm going to say let URL be equal to URL like this, and string, then we need to pass in a URL. Now I'm going to be using this site that allows us to be able to basically send like mock a response. So we're going to send data and it's going to give us a response, okay? And I'm going to leave a link to this in the description so you can also follow along. So if you get over here, you're going to see that there are actually different endpoints. Here we have /post that has 100 different posts. So let's just open this and see what it looks like. You can see this is a whole lot of data, right? And don't worry, we're going to see what that does in a bit. But for now, in this video, let's actually use that. Let's actually just fetch a list of posts. So I'm going to click on this, and let's get the URL. So I hope you remember from the last video what URL is. So this is our endpoint. So I'm going to come over here and paste this here, and let's actually just use a guard to make sure that this URL actually exists, because like this it returns an optional URL. So I'm going to use a guard statement, and else we're going to simply just return. All right, so now we have access to our URL. We're just going to pass in URL right there. Pretty easy, right? Now we have our session, we have our shared instance, and we're using our data task to make a request to the URL specified. Now we can actually pass in a closure right here that has 3 parameters. First is the data, we have the response, and finally we have error. If I know how to spell error. So this is going to be called whenever the response is gotten, whenever the server responds. All right, now at this point we have access to our data, we have access to our error or whatever. So we can actually do some checks over here. I can say if let error equals error, that means that if there's an error, I want to print there was an error. I can actually just print the error like this, the localized description. Else it means there was no error and it was successful. So we can actually display our data right here, which is what we're going to do. Now if we look over here, you can see that our data is of type data. Well, you can't see it over here, but if I were to type like this, you see that data is of type data. So what we want to do here is to convert this data to an object that we can actually use in Swift. So what we're going to do is we're going to say let our JSON data or JSON response, RES, be equal to JSON serialization. So we're going to be using the JSON serialization dot. We're going to say JSON object with data and then the options. So I'm going to click enter, and where we have data, we need to pass in the data. Now this is expecting a data, not an optional data, but for the sake of, well, laziness, I'm just going to force this. And then for options, for now, you can actually provide a couple of options here, but for now, I'm just going to leave this empty, okay? Now we have access to our JSON response. Let's go ahead and print this. So I'm going to say print the, can you hear the noise in the background? That's a truck, noisy. So we're going to say the response, and then we're going to pass in our JSON response. But now it's actually complaining of an error, and we've actually spoken about throwing exceptions, all right, trying and catching, and you can see that this method actually throws an exception. So we need to catch it. So we have three different options, right? We can use the try, we can use the optional try, we can use the do catch, we can use the try, force bang, well, different methods. I have a video explaining this, and I'm going to leave a link to that as well so you can brush up in case you have issues understanding. So what I'm going to do again is just say try, and let's just use the optional try. All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and run this, and we should receive a response. Fingers crossed, my man. Actually, we're not gonna, but I want you to see something. So the app is running, but we can't see anything. What is happening? This is running in the view did load, and I'm sure it actually got here, but it's not making the request. Now the thing is, and it's actually a mistake that I honestly just made. People make this mistake a lot, so don't be bothered or angry if you did the same thing. But anyhow, whenever you do this, whenever you create a session or a task, it is initially in a suspended state, right? It does not trigger, it doesn't make the request. So we need to manually call the resume function like this. So when you call resume, the request is now gonna be made, all right? So I forget it a lot. If you do as well, welcome to the group. So now we should receive a response in our print. All right, I thought for a second it didn't come. Well, you can see over here that we have made our first network request. And this is the same data that is displayed right here. Pretty neat, right? Now we can actually do a couple of things. We can actually come and maybe let's just pick the title over here and maybe populate a table view. Should we do that? I don't know if we have much time for that, but yeah, you can do that. You can sort through your data and then get all of the title and then update your table view. And then you can also click on that particular cell, get the full information. You can see how an app works, right? Well, now we've been able to make a successful request, GET request to this endpoint. Pretty neat. Now, let's actually make one more request. But before then, for making it this far, go ahead to abarian.ng and apply the coupon code. What should the coupon code be this time? Use URL Session. So URL Session like this. I'm gonna get 5,000 Naira discount. Pick whatever product you like and enjoy. So let's get back to the video. Yeah, we're gonna go over to a post request. So what I want us to do right now is to send data to the server, right? Now that's a little bit more tricky than a simple get, but you definitely can do it. So I'm gonna move this into a function right here, and I'm gonna say get posts, okay? And let's now do the create. Now, what I want us to do is to create a post. And you can see from our response over here, we have a title, we have a body, okay? So we're gonna create our own post. And to do that, we need to first of all create our data. So I'm gonna create a dictionary here, and I'm gonna call this params. This is gonna be equal to this. So first we have our title, and I'm gonna call this Mako is the best. Awesome. Then the body, whoosh, what am I spelling here? So the body is gonna be, should I even say so? I always have problem naming stuff. I don't know why. So this is the body of the post. Get over it, fam. Awesome. So this is our data that we want to send to the backend. So Now we're going to do something a little bit different. Rather than using a URL like that, we're going to use a URL request. So I'm going to say let request be equal to URL request, and this we're going to pass in a URL. So we're going to use the same URL we have here. So I'm just going to copy this because I'm extremely lazy, and I'm going to paste that here and pass in URL. But the other thing we need here, or the thing that URL request allows us to do, is actually to configure what type of request we're going to be making. So I can say request.method or HTTP method, and here I'm going to say post. And remember post because we want to what? Create a record. Awesome. And yes, this has to be a variable, so I'm going to change that to a variable. Now the next thing I want to do is to set the type of data that I want to be sending through the body. So what I'm going to say is request.setValue right here, and the value is application/JSON. So I'm going to be sending JSON. And in case you don't know what JSON data is, it simply means JavaScript object notation. So it just allows us to be able to format data in a particular way, and it actually makes it very readable. So if you look at this, you can see that we have the title, which is the key, and then we have a value. So JSON data gives us or allows us to have a key and a value. The key is a string. The value can be of any type. It can be an integer, a string, or whatever. So that's simply what we're saying. We're saying that the data we're passing in is a JSON data, okay? And the header is content type, and it has to be written like this. So that's what kind of content is going to be sent to the server. It is JSON. Simple. So now we have that. We can now go ahead and create our session. So how do we create a session again? I can't remember. Please remind me, man. So session is going to be equal to URL session dot, and we're going to just use the shared instance again, and then DataTask. But this time we're going to be using the request. So you can see with request, URL request, and we're going to pass in request. I'm sure you guessed that. And again, we have a completion like that, which has 3 parameters. So we have our data, we have our response, and finally we have our error in. Sweet. So now we need to see what kind of data or what kind of response we get back. Normally, when you create data, you usually get a response of the data you created with probably like additional information like the ID, maybe the time created, and all of those things. So we're going to be expecting that when we create this data right here, we want to receive a response with this data, right? So we're going to do the same thing we have over here. We can just say if let error, just to make sure that it was successful. And we have our else right here. So here I'm going to say print the error was, and then we're going to pass in error.localized description, as you guessed. Now here, we want to convert this to an object we can actually relate with. So I'm going to say let's JSON response. And you can see that we're actually repeating code. So I'm sure your mind has told you that we can actually squash these 2 guys into a single method and then call it once. It's going to do the same thing. So you can see that, don't worry, as we go further, we're going to sort of like make this guy cleaner, right? So the JSON response is going to be equal to, we're going to try again to, actually I don't want to type it again. I'm tired, man. So we're going to do the same thing, and let's actually just go ahead and print the response for now, and then I'm going to show you how you can do some other extra stuff. So response JSON is what exactly am I typing here? So this is going to be the JSON response. So I think we can go ahead and run this now. You see, I already forgot the second time. So we need to resume this. Don't forget, don't be like me. All right, so let's run this and see what we get. Fingers crossed, my man. So something odd happened. We received a response, but there's no data. Do you know why? I do. So we created our data here, but I didn't do anything with it. This data is just here. So we actually need to add this data to the body of our request. So we're going to say request dot body HTTP body, and that's going to be equal to our params. But there's a catch. We can't pass in params like this because the HTTP body is expecting a data object. You can see over here is expecting a data object. So we need to convert this guy to a data object. How do we do that? I'm sure you saw something quite similar here. We're going to use the JSONSerialization. So say JSONSerialization. I hope I pronounced that. No, I did. Dot, and we're going to say data with. So this is going to return a data object. Where are you at? Data, like that. And what's the object? Simple, params. And the options, again, we're just going to use an empty array. So now we've passed in our data and it's good. Let's run it again and we should see our actual response. Uh-oh, an error. So this again throws. So we need to say try. Cool. Any more errors, my friend? Nope. All right, perfect. So you can see over here we have our data, or our response came in, and the title is Mako is the best. Of course he is. And the body is, this is the body of the post, get over it fam. So this is it. We've actually made a get, we've made a post request using the URL Sessions DataTask. And if you have any questions, go ahead, leave it in the comment section. But before we go, there's a couple of things I want you to note, even though I'm not going to demonstrate it here, but when we're going to be working with updating our UI, it's going to be important for us to know this. So this took us away from the main thread, right? This block like this took us away from the main thread. And that means that if you were going to update your UI, you need to make sure that you get back on the main thread before you do it. So if I were to do something like self.view.like background color or .text or title, whatever, is going to be equal to red. If I did that in here, we're going to have an issue because we're updating the UI from another thread. Okay, so it's just something to note. So at this point, you'd want to jump back to the main thread. And in case you don't understand how all of these things work, I actually have a video on that. I'm going to leave a link as well. So do well and just watch it. It's going to be helpful. Also, you could also have memory leakage, or there's potentially ways that you can introduce memory leakage over here. So don't worry, I'm not going to bore you or overload you with a lot of information, but I just wanted to point it out. So this brings us to the end of this video. If you have questions, go ahead, leave it in the comment section. I'll gladly respond. And try and win that gift, my friend. Try. So, peace, guys.